You are standing in the middle of nowhere. Sand in every direction. The sun is a hammer. Your mouth is dry, your lips are cracking, and there's no river, no lake, no tap. What do you do? For thousands of years, this wasn't a survival show scenario. This was Tuesday. Entire human populations lived in some of the driest places on Earth for tens of thousands of years without a single well or pipe, no plastic bottles, no GPS to the nearest spring. And yet they thrived, not just survived, thrived, raised children, told stories, grew old. So how did they do it? How did people find water in places where there was, by every obvious measure, no water at all? The answer isn't luck. It's knowledge. Deep, inherited, ruthlessly precise knowledge, passed down for generations, about a landscape most of us would call empty. Let's start with the ground itself. In the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa, the San people, sometimes called the Bushmen, have lived for tens of thousands of years in one of the harshest dry environments on the planet. Anthropologist Richard Lee spent years living among the Jew/Huansi San in the 1960s, documenting exactly how they found food and water in terrain that looked, to an outsider, like nothing but dust and thorn bush. What Lee found was startling. The San weren't wandering blindly, hoping to stumble onto water. They were reading the desert like a map. Dry riverbeds, the ones that looked completely empty, weren't empty at all. Underneath the sand, water pooled just below the surface, held there by clay layers deep in the earth. You just had to know where to dig. And they didn't dig with shovels. They used hollow reeds called sip wells or sucking wells. Pushed down into damp sand until they hit moisture. Then they would suck the water up through the reed, filter it through a small wad of grass to keep sand out and draw it, slow sip by slow sip, straight from the earth. A single sip well, tended carefully, could supply a small group for days. Think about that for a second. No visible water, no stream, no puddle, just sand, and a straw made from a plant, turning invisible moisture into a drinkable resource. That's not luck. That's generations of accumulated environmental memory handed down until it became instinct. But sip wells were only one method. The desert had other secrets, and one of the strangest lived underground, in the form of a plant. The tsama melon grows wild across the Kalahari, and it looks almost like a small watermelon. Its flesh is over 90% water. During the dry season, when surface water disappeared completely, tsama melons became a walking, breathing water source. Not walking, obviously, but portable. You could carry them. You could store them. Anthropologist James Sussman, who has spent decades studying the Juhuanzi and their relatives, has documented how these melons and similar underground tubers weren't just backup food. In certain seasons, they were the primary water supply for entire communities, more reliable than any spring. Here's the part that should stop you. Some of these tubers grow more than a meter underground, with almost nothing visible on the surface. Finding them required an intimate map of the land, memorized not from a book but from a grandmother, an uncle, a childhood spent watching where the elders dug, missed the spot by a few feet, and you'd find nothing but dry soil. Now picture the scene. A small group moves across cracked earth at dawn before the heat becomes unbearable. An elder stops, studies a faint crack in the ground, a slight color change in the sand. Maybe a wilted vine barely visible above the surface. She kneels. She digs with a simple wooden stick sharpened and hardened by fire. Minutes later, she pulls out a tuber, the size of a fist, heavy with water. No one taught her this from a textbook. She learned it the same way she learned to walk. But storage was just as important as finding water in the first place. What happens when you find a source and need to carry that water somewhere else, across open desert for days? This is where the story gets almost unbelievable. Archaeologist Pierre-Jean Texier and his team, working at Deep Kloof Rock Shelter in South Africa, uncovered fragments of ostrich eggshells dated to roughly 60,000 years ago. These weren't food waste. They were engraved, deliberately marked with repeating geometric patterns and drilled with a small hole at one end. They were water bottles. 60,000 years old. Ancient people would empty an ostrich egg through a tiny hole, fill the shell with water, and plug it. The engravings weren't just decoration. Some researchers believe the patterns may have marked ownership, or simply reflected a shared cultural style, almost like a signature on a canteen everyone recognized. These eggshell flasks could be buried in the sand near a known water source, hidden as an emergency cache, and dug up months later still holding drinkable water, an emergency water supply buried in the desert, marked with art, and retrievable half a year on. That's not primitive, that's engineering. So let's reconstruct a full day using everything you now know. You wake before sunrise while the sand is still cool. You already know from memory passed down over generations where yesterday's sip well was tended. You visit it first, drawing water slowly through a hollow reed, filtering it through grass. Later, as the sun climbs, you and your group move toward a patch of ground where Tessama melons grow beneath the surface. A spot no stranger could ever locate. You dig, you find water-heavy flesh, and you eat and drink at once. And somewhere behind you, buried near a landmark only your people would recognize, sits an ostrich eggshell canteen filled weeks ago, waiting for the day the sip well runs dry. Here's the twist that flips everything you probably assumed. We tend to imagine desert survival as constant, desperate crisis, grasping, thirsty, one step from death. But for people who held this knowledge, the desert wasn't a death trap, it was a system. A predictable, learnable, survivable system, with rules that had been tested and refined for tens of thousands of years. The real danger was never the desert itself, it was losing the knowledge of how to read it. And that's the uncomfortable mirror this story holds up to your life right now. You live in a world where water arrives with the twist of a handle. You've never had to memorize where moisture hides beneath sand, or which melon can save your life, or how to bury a message to your future self in the shell of an egg. That convenience is remarkable, but it also means an entire category of human knowledge. Knowledge that kept people alive for tens of thousands of years has quietly gone extinct in most of the world, not because it stopped working, but because we stopped needing it. Somewhere deep in your instincts is a distant echo of that same problem-solving mind, the one that once turned a hollow reed and a piece of grass into a lifeline. You just haven't needed to use it. Yet. You are standing in the middle of nowhere, sand in every direction, the sun is a hammer, but now you know something you didn't before. That empty landscape was never actually empty. It was a map, written by thousands of years of human attention, and somebody once knew how to read every single line of it.